Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Today's webinar will be an introduction to our hybrid SAN technology. My name is Mark Adams. I'm a product pre-sales specialist for Hikvision, and I'm joined today by Michael Dye, our product manager for the hybrid SAN products. If you have any questions as we go through the presentation, please type them into the chat and Michael will answer them as we go along. I'm going to give a bit of background information on network storage, then look at the key features of our hybrid SAN range, and then we'll take a quick look at the individual products. Before I talk about the hybrid SAN, it will probably be helpful to clarify what a normal SAN is. Imagine you have a large office where everyone has their own computer. They may well create their own documents and other files, which can easily be stored directly on that computer. But they may also need access to other documents, which are also used by other people in the same office. It wouldn't make sense for everyone to have a copy of the same documents, so instead you'd use centralized storage. You'd have a device connected to your network whose job is to store all the files and make them available to whoever needs them. Obviously, you can set this up so only people with the right permissions can access specific files. This is called network attached storage, or a NAS. Now imagine you want to do something similar, but on a larger scale. Much faster, more reliable, and easier to expand. This is where you need a SAN, a storage area network. This lets you connect multiple storage devices together, running on their own network, separate from the network the office computers are on. You can add more storage whenever you need, and you can use the devices as backups to each other. So if one stops working, the others can take over from it. Originally, the devices in the SAN were connected together using fiber optic cables. This was called fiber channel, or FCSAN. These systems were very expensive, but they were used because fiber used to be much faster than traditional Ethernet connections. Now that faster and faster Ethernet connections have become available, it's more common to use that instead of fiber because it's much less expensive. We call this an IPSAN. You can see here some of the benefits of using an IPSAN. First, it uses an open standard called iSCSI, which means devices from many different manufacturers can be used together. It consolidates your storage into one place, making it easy to manage. You can add more storage and make changes all from one place. But there are some downsides too, especially when you're using it for storing your video footage from CCTV cameras. You need a storage server to control everything, which communicates with each storage device and determines how your data is stored and retrieved. Depending on the setup, you may also need separate management and forwarding servers, so this can get very expensive. Because video uses a lot of bandwidth, you can also find the storage server becomes a bottleneck, as it has to cope with all the video data coming in and then send it out to the storage devices. Also, because it uses a traditional file system, your data can become fragmented, which makes it slower to access. Again, this is far more notable with large video files where you need smooth playback. Our hybrid SAN keeps the advantages of a normal IPSAN, but overcomes the disadvantages when it's used for CCTV. Video files are recorded straight to the storage devices, cutting out the storage server completely. This saves the cost of buying that server, but it also means there's one less step in the process, so everything is faster, recording the video footage and making playback easier. You can connect NVRs to the hybrid SAN, or you can connect your cameras directly to it, removing the need for an NVR. Either way, you'll get smoother playback because you're not going through an intermediate device. We also support ONVIF and RTSP, so you can add third-party cameras too. You're not limited to just Hikvision products. Here's a little animation to help visualize the difference between a traditional SAN and our hybrid SAN. At the top, you can see the system in traditional SAN mode. This uses standard IT networking protocols for transferring data. This isn't optimized for video, so the video stream needs to be converted into the correct format by the storage server and then transferred to the separate storage device. In our direct streaming mode, the hybrid SAN is working directly with the video stream. There's no conversion needed. And of course, we're recording straight to the SAN without needing a separate server. The hybrid SAN uses a modular design, so it's easy to swap out components when needed. Each model has 2 separate power supplies and 2 fans. If one fails, the system will keep working and send an alarm. You can swap out the failed part without turning the system off or having any downtime. The components are designed to plug directly into the SAN with no cables, which also makes the whole system more robust. The model shown in this picture has 2 controllers too, giving you total redundancy. This obviously does add to the cost, so we have versions with 1 controller available, but they still have 2 fans and 2 power supplies. To retrieve video data quickly and efficiently, we create a video index. This allows the system to very quickly find a specific piece of video footage when it's needed. It's just like the index in a book. You can easily identify the location of the information you're interested in without having to read the entire book, as it were. Because this is so important to keeping everything running efficiently, the SAN always keeps a backup of the video index. So even if a hard drive fails and damages the information in the index, we can still recover it. You probably know the basics of RAID. It's designed to give you some protection if 1 or more hard drives in the system fail. The most commonly used version is RAID 5. Here, if 1 of your hard drive fails, the system keeps working. No information is lost, and you can keep recording your CCTV footage. If a second hard drive fails, though, your system stops working completely. You'll lose some or all of your video footage, and the system will stop recording. RAID 6 is similar, but it can cope with 2 drives failing. If a third drive fails, though, you have exactly the same problem as before. We have our own custom version called VRAID, which is based on RAID 5. In the same way as RAID 5, if 1 drive fails, it can keep working until you're able to replace the faulty drive. The difference is that if multiple drives fail, the system will at least keep recording, just giving you a bit more time to replace the failed drives. The IPSAN has up to 24 hard drive bays, but if you need an even bigger system, you can connect multiple units together. But if you're using the dual controller versions, there's an easier solution in most cases. You can add up to 2 expansion units. These act as storage units only. The SAN is still doing all the processing work, so they're obviously more cost effective. If you have a situation where it's absolutely critical that the system is always up and running, you can connect a backup SAN as a standby device. You can connect multiple SANs to it, and if 1 or more of these fail, even at the same time, it will keep the system working and recording. Once the faulty SAN is back in action, the backup unit will transfer all the recorded video back to the main one. Our hybrid SANs also support a number of other technologies to ensure your video data is kept safe. First, they support ANR, automatic network replenishment. If there's a problem with the network, the video will be kept in the NVR, and then when the network is fixed, it will automatically be uploaded to the SAN. You can even do this with a camera connected straight to the SAN without an NVR. You just need an SD card in the camera. Like with an NVR, if the storage is completely filled up, the system will eventually start overwriting the oldest recordings. If you have important video evidence that you need to keep, you can lock these files to make sure they're kept. And lastly, you can set a scheduled backup from the NVR to the hybrid SAN. For example, you might not want the NVR to be transferring video files to the SAN during the day when the network is busy and you could cause issues for other users. So instead, you can set up a schedule so the backup happens at night, for example, when the network could be under far less strain. You can see some examples here of where these products can be really useful. Large retailers will have multiple sites spread across the country. They could have an NVR at each location, but then back up everything to a SAN at one central location. A large city may need a very large number of cameras, more than an NVR can support. Rather than using multiple NVRs, you can use a hybrid SAN. It supports far more channels than an NVR, and also, of course, has more storage capability. And in critical infrastructure, which will often have much stricter security requirements than normal, it's crucial that the video recording equipment is extremely reliable. With our hybrid SANs, as you saw, we have dual power controls, dual fans, and the option of dual controllers, so you can make sure the system is always up and running. Let's look at some of the different ways you can use the hybrid SAN. It can actually be used in 3 separate ways. If you have an NVR or DVR that just needs more storage than it natively supports, you can add the SAN just like a network drive, and you suddenly have a huge amount of extra capacity. So now, rather than being forced to reduce the frame rate or video quality to save space, you can keep recording in high quality, which is obviously helpful. It's easy to add the hybrid SAN to your NVR or DVR as an external storage device, and it will simply get used as needed. You don't need to change your recording schedule or anything else. It can also be used like any other IPSAN. You have a storage server running Windows or Linux, and you add our SAN to it for storing whatever files you need access to across your network. And lastly, of course, you can use direct streaming in hybrid SAN mode for recording directly from your MVRs or cameras with all the advantages we've already covered. Here you can see we have multiple sites, all with our own MVRs, but with centralized storage in that one main location. You might also want to store footage locally on the MVR, perhaps for 30 days in case local staff need to access it for some reason, but then it can be deleted from the MVR to free up space or overwritten as it normally would be, but you still have it backed up at a central location. And perhaps you also want to store it here for a longer period of time, say 90 days. Another scenario is where you have body-worn or in-vehicle cameras. You record to their built-in storage while they're in use, but then, say at the end of a shift, when the user returns to a central location, you can offload the footage onto the SAN. As you can see here, the mobile MVR or body-worn cameras can connect your network via Wi-Fi and upload the video footage. You can manage this using a customized version of IVMS 4200. This isn't the standard IVMS, so if you need this solution, let us know and we can provide the software for you. So to configure the hybrid SAN, you'd use its built-in web server. But to access the video files, you just add the SAN into Hike Central or IVMS 4200. In IVMS, you just add the SAN the same way as if it was an MVR, and in Hike Central, you add it as if it were a recording server. Either way, you now have access to all of the connected cameras in the same way as you would normally. And now let's look at the individual products. This is a single controller model. The S at the end of the part code indicates this. As you can see, it supports up to 320 channels in direct streaming mode and up to 180 channels if you're using IPSAN mode. This is assuming you're streaming up to 2 megabits per second from each camera. Now, this one supports up to 16 SATA hard drives. You need to use enterprise class drives in all of these units. And we have a list of drives that we've tested and are fully compatible. Please only use drives that are on this list. Normal surveillance class drives like Western Digital Purple are not compatible. Please always refer to the list of compatible drives. This is just a larger version of the previous one. It's physically bigger because it supports up to 24 hard drives, but it has all the same features. And here's the dual controller option with D at the end of the part code. This can record up to 448 channels at 2 megabits per second in direct streaming mode or 256 channels in IPSAN mode. There are a couple of other really important differences compared to the ones we've just looked at. First, the dual controller version doesn't support VRAID, but it does support all the normal RAID versions. Secondly, it doesn't use SATA hard drives. Because it has two controllers, it needs SAS drives, as these can be accessed by both controllers, whereas SATA drives can't. And lastly, the dual controllers support the expandable storage that I mentioned earlier by adding up to 2 enclosures. And here's the expandable storage enclosure we've just been talking about. It supports up to 24 drives, and like the main unit, they need to be SAS drives. Finally, we have a new super capacity series. These provide really high storage capability, but with relatively low cost. They come bundled with Seagate 18 terabyte enterprise grade drives. And because we're using 18 terabyte drives rather than the more common 8 terabyte ones, these units use less energy, about half as much as the same storage capacity if you were using 8 terabyte drives. It also works out about 35% cheaper per terabyte. And keep in mind, the drives aren't pre-installed into the unit. The installer still needs to do this, as it wouldn't be a good idea to ship them out already installed. So here's the different products. This model is available bundled with either 13 or 16 drives. 13 drives will give you 234 terabytes of storage, and 16 will give you 288 terabytes. They both support up to 252 channels in direct streaming mode. And make sure you're aware, these only support direct streaming mode. These super capacity units can't be used as a standard IPSAN. They're only intended for direct video streaming from MVRs or cameras. They also can't be used as failover devices or for scheduled backup from an MVR. So these are ideal for situations where you have a very large deployment requiring more cameras than even our largest MBRs can support. If you need even higher capacity, this one supports up to 400 channels at 2 megabits per second. It has room for 24 drives, and we supply it with either 19 or 24. 19 drives will give you 342 terabytes, and 24 will give you 432 terabytes. The rest of the features are the same.